really fast.
So we are aware that there were 4 different presentations and we may hopscotch all over the place, but can we see a show of hands for people who have questions for the panelists? They covered everything? Okay, oh, thank you. Please stand up and speak your question. Please speak up.
As a problem, because as I talk to more and more brands out there, a lot of them are saying that, well, I have like, 10,000 friends or 1 million friends, but I can't get them to do anything. Okay, so what that says is that the value of a fan is actually fairly limited, right? It's opt-in for you to market to them, right? But if they are able to interact and take actions, such as sharing content with others and influencing others' purchase decision and building strong relationship with the brand, then I think the value there could be much, much greater.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
You are. Okay. I was actually going to ask if you wanted to elaborate on that, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No? Okay.
Go ahead.
So I have a question for you, Jon, which is I think sometimes, which I think is really interesting, and you talk about a lot in your book, Game On, which is a great book. So there's this assertion, right, that these social games have done, like games from Zynga, like Farmville, have done an extraordinary job, right? They're the most popular games of all time. Farmville is more popular than the most popular television shows in America by a factor of 4. It is astonishing, right? So on one hand, we have this we have a nuanced argument about the fact that there's deep immersive gameplay concepts that have really been successful and engaging, and you talk a lot about those. But then on the other hand, games people look at Farmville and go, that is the most shallow piece of shit game I've ever seen. I don't understand, and there's still tons of hand-wringing. Right? I don't understand why people love it. It doesn't make any sense. It's so shallow. It's like, okay. So is it possible that there may be some, that we may be trying to over-design or over-engineer? That there's a school of thought that's that doesn't accept that some experiences, simpler experiences, might be engaging, motivating, cool to people. They don't have to be as complicated.
Well, simple often is very good. I think that, unfortunately, there's a couple of camps out there in game design that's sort of there's the social games are evil people, and there's the social games are awesome money machines that make me lots of money people. And it's a lot more nuanced than that, in that I think that what social games have done very successfully is shown that there are new types of game mechanics, new types of distribution channels, new types of gameplay that people are interested in. And for years, at least in the video game industry, there's been a lot of emphasis on the single-player experience, the pure story that you go in and do a role-playing game or do a strategy experience. And social games have shown that there's a lot of interest in just being with your friends, doing stuff with your friends. And I think that it's a little bit naive, actually, to look at it as shallow gameplay. It's shallow gameplay if the way you define a game experience is an awesome fantasy role-playing game story or lots of 3D immersive graphics. What they have done is they've shown that there are new ways to play a game. There's new ways to interact with people. That's very valid. Now, that's not for me to sit here and be an apologist for Zynga and say that they've created the best games ever. I think what they've done is they've shown that there's a great market for games with new types of gameplay, and where we're going to be 5 years out from now are enriched social game experiences with a lot more production values, a lot more immersion within them, and I think you're actually already seeing that in some of the newer games like Empires and Allies, for example, is a pretty good game. I think it's got good gameplay values in it, and we're going to see more and more of that. You're going to see kind of a fluorescence of all types of gameplay experiences with role-playing, with a lot of immersive characteristics. But it really comes down to this idea that people being with their friends, having fun with their friends, that is a type of gameplay. And there can be a whole class of new novel gameplay systems that stem from social interactions.
Gabe, you put up an excellent straw man, and John, congratulations on resisting the bait. This is an old game industry debate about most of us come up from playing complex war games and complex role-playing games, and therefore that many of us sneered at simpler games. And when you say shallow or simplistic, but simple games are also in many ways the hardest to be able to develop, so that they will actually compel a lot of people. I assume, Gabe, that was part of what you were getting at.
Yeah, and often the argument about, I'm all for richer and deeper and more meaningful experiences, but I think, to John's point, people, especially when we talk about gamification versus games, and where I draw, for me, a big line, a bright line exists here, is that in most of the context that we're designing gamification for, we're designing a non-fiction gaming experience. We are working with real people, real brands, real products in the real world. And our job is not necessarily to introduce a brand new narrative. Because often, especially when you're dealing with brands that have been around for 100 years, the narrative is very, very, very well defined. The narrative of Campbell's tomato soup is super well defined. And our job is not to come in and reintroduce a brand new narrative about landing on Galactica 5 and chasing the soup monster. And so one of the things that one of the things that one of my kind of points of the dividing line here in the two ideas is there is, to a great extent, simpler is definitely better. And we don't always have to, we don't need to bring in every technique from kind of classic narrative game design. In fact, we need to winnow them down, because we don't need to do all of those things that were done before.
I'll go back to the audience for a moment, but this leads to, James presented us with several excellent examples of games that were so simple that they got past the barrier to entry, or if you will, the activity threshold, for bankers who you may think of as game players because of how they manipulate the financial system, but certainly you don't think of civil servants that way. James, are there any rules about towards simpler is better that you can share with the audience?
So the company I now work for obviously builds these. That's what we do. And it is our observation that the simpler we make these things, the more likely it is we'll get to the magic number. There seems to be a magic number for this sort of game for us inside a large corporation. Between 500 and 1,000 actively engaged players, about 3 times a week playing. Before you get to the magic number, you have a suggestion box, maybe with a bit of steroid action. After that, you have a game. And so we have found that the simpler we can make it, the simpler and lower the barriers to entry, the less effort it takes to get those players in the first place. And in the corporate context, getting people in, creating the crowd in the first place is actually the biggest challenge. And so the quicker you can get there, the quicker you don't have to do that recruitment anymore. Simpler works for that.
And this ties into rules that we've learned in the games industry. No matter how simple you think you should be designing it, it's probably that you start by thinking you should probably end up doing simpler, which is different than simplistic, but that's a longer discussion. Back to the audience.
Yeah, I had a question. I think this is for Michael, and maybe Gabe can chime in. We're all talking about kind of the 4, gamer types, and I think it's very interesting. And at my company, Nexercise, we try to motivate people to move more, and we're trying to try to figure out the different types by looking at how often people look at a leaderboard, et cetera. But the whole, I'm talking about, or if they care about the badges, or they're talking about, or being more social. I guess my question is that the whole notification trigger thing really sparked something interesting to me. Would you think it would be detrimental or positive to try to basically use kind of notifications to try to determine the player type, to see their response? Would that actually be useful, or do you think that could also be detrimental? Because if I'm sending a notification on an iOS phone that's kind of more competitive, and a person's not competitive, could that like I'm saying, what are your thoughts in that area at least?
Okay. So just to summarize, you want to know about the efficacy of notifications as a discovery for what sort of player type population you're dealing with, correct?
Exactly. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll take a crack at that. What we found at Lithium is that like sometimes it's not necessary to motivate every single user type. And by the way, you know, Bartol's type it's a very simplistic model, right? There's actually a lot more sophisticated model. But if you don't have any information, I think that's a good start. And what we found is that, like, you know, for a customer base where we don't know, for a brand, they don't know this much about their customer, then you only have to, in some cases, you only have to drive behavior for the killers, right? They're motivated they're the easiest to spot, right? They're most engaged. So you drive them to act, right? Once they act, they create, you know, the key is to design the system such that when they do something, they create something of value for other people, right? And then the achiever will try to come in and try to aspire to them, right? And then the explorer will also kind of start to come in and start digging into the material that they create. So that kind of draws in the other two groups, right? And once those two groups are there, you have about, you know, 20%, 25% of the population, and they will have some of their friends, right? So now that, you know, some of the friends are already on there, then the 80%, the 70%, 80% of the socializer will come in because of the friends are there. So it's more like you have these early adopter and then the mass, later adopters coming in.
I would say also vis-a-vis notifications and the loop here, one thing that we don't talk about a lot in Bartol's types or in Jon's types or any sort of typology is the negative reinforcement. So we've been talking a lot about what's the positive side of this. What do we do to make them engaged? There's also some things that if they don't happen, or if they do happen, those types will avoid or avert, right? So classic example, I gave you the one for the achievers. One of the obvious ones is I can't win, I don't win, these people aren't serious about giving me a prize, right? Those are all possible achiever negative motivations. You know, negative one on socializers is people don't respond to me socially. Like if you guys are friends of mine on Facebook, and I encourage you to be if you'd like, I post a lot of pictures of food. And I cook a lot, I love to cook, and I post pictures of my food on Facebook. Yeah, I see you all typing right now. And you know, I'm really sensitive to people responding to my food photos. Like you know, it's true. So like how many likes I get, for example, and what people say, like I'm really, really conscious of that. So as an example, when that doesn't work out for me, I'm like, oh God, people don't like that thing I made, you know, even if it was delicious. So anyway, so the bottom line is there's all these like kind of aversion concepts as well. So when you think about the notification elements of them, or you think about any positive reinforcement, also think about negative or absent reinforcers which could cause negative behavior.
One small editorial note over here. Richard Bartle, for those of you who are unaware, is the seminal designer for online games. He did the first one, Mud, in the late 1970s. And in his defense, because the model of his 4 player types is somewhat simplistic, it was designed to describe a very specific population of people. Hardcore gamers who are willing to spend $6 an hour or £4 an hour to play text-based games. And that is what the model was used to describe when he came up with it. So he would be the first to tell you it doesn't apply across the set of like normal human beings.
But I actually don't know. I think the thing about Bartol's types is, as you see it kind of continue to exist, not that we need to prosecute this right now, but just saying, while a lot of people don't like them and other people have other perspectives, it's important to bring it into the discussion because it actually is a really interesting way of looking at the population.
Right, but Gabe, just as you reminded you and Jon reminded this audience that they are not normal. We also have to, which we all are. I mean, we want to do this strange thing called gamification. I mean, I've been in the games field for 30 years. I'm definitely not normal.
Look at you.
But we have to understand that we also have to understand that our approach to our audience, that in general, the idea of gamification, using game mechanics to do workplace activities are not normal from the perspective of our player group. And when we lose sight of that, we lose sight of the ability to get them to cooperate because we understand that. We can take one last question from the audience over here.
How would you apply gamification to a hospital working environment, like for nurses? They're fast-paced, a lot of them works 12 hours.
I guess it's what are you trying to gamify? You're trying to
Like procedures that they're
Yeah, so to perfect certain diagnostic.
Certain jobs that they're doing daily, it's like a daily routinely.
Mhm.
What would you do to motivate them to do it more on time and stuff?
I think the team dynamic there will work well, but I'll leave it to some of the other people just comment as well.
I mean, it's funny that you mentioned healthcare because people sometimes ask me, like, are there things gamification isn't good for? And the example I always use is, well, I wouldn't want to have to do a game or earn a badge when I needed to use a defibrillator on someone, for example. Like, that's not a good time for gamification. But on the other hand, learning to use a defibrillator, the learning process before the emergency happens, that might be a good place. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities to use gamification more in the training, education, immersion side before the day-to-day. That's not to say that there probably aren't some good, clever ideas for how it might impact the day-to-day work environment of a healthcare professional, but it may be that the things that lead up to that are the better places for gamification to occur.
One of our
James, go.
One of our customers in Asia Pacific is a district health board, and they use a similar game environment to the one I described here today. And I can tell you that that's mainly nurses. My observation, having helped them, which is interesting, I think, is you would anticipate that they were driven by altruism and things, wanting to make things better. I can observe for you that nurses are more competitive than bankers, and that it often results in significant competitive battles.
By the way, just as a note, for first responders, specifically nurses, there are two ways that games have been proven effective. One is the equivalent of CLEs, that is the idea of being able to show that you refresh your knowledge. These are simple knowledge or trivia game, which are just designed to see how fresh is your basic knowledge. Can you recognize a symptom or know what drugs should be applied? And the second thing that is extraordinarily important for first responders are games that cause you to drill, either to repeat processes or to repeat knowledge. But obviously you don't use that, as John said, in the case of when you're operating a defibrillator. It's designed so that when you are using the defibrillator, the knowledge will be will almost be second nature. And we've decided to do one last question.
Could you talk a little bit about the terms? I heard the term yesterday, polish, with Microsoft Ribbon Hero, and the importance of polish, and then also from an onboarding perspective, the importance of the first minute and really diving into, from a design perspective, really how do you captivate that first minute and make that as interesting as possible?
The capture process, go.
I mean, polish is important because it relates to one of the 4 quadrants that I referred to, which is immersion. If people feel like they're not engaging with a story, if they don't feel like they are someone in the process, then they feel very disconnected from the experience. And lack of polish usually means not just bugs, but things that are just rough around the edges that prohibit someone from being able to really get in and have the experience in an optimal way.
And does someone want to answer the capture question?
Yeah, the main thing that I think about when I think about onboarding is at the beginning of the casual games business, which Eric certainly remembers super well, in the early 2000s, we used to think that we had an hour to convince a consumer whether or not a game was good. So the whole rubric for how the trial period of a game was designed in the early 2000s was you had 60 minutes or so to play a game. And the whole experience was designed around that first 60 minutes, get you to like really, and we experimented with every single time parameter there at my last startup, and we found, the 60 minutes was like the optimal time. 60 minutes. Now, it's only 10 years later. Can you imagine giving 60 minutes of your life to any brand new experience before it yields value back to you? Could you even, this is crazy. Right? How short, and some people say short attention span. And I'm like, okay, well, I think this is, I don't know if it's short attention span or shorter attention span or whatever it is, but we've ended up at a place where honestly, I think 60 minutes has become 60 seconds. And that, just by observation of the way that, we act and the types of experiences that people are designing and where they seem to really be optimized, it's really that first 1 to 3 minutes that makes the absolute determination about whether or not you will continue. And really great game designers, companies that have been very successful like Zynga, focus relentlessly on those first few minutes and optimizing that experience.
Thank you, Gabe. Because of the vital nature, the conference has generously given us 25 more minutes than we were programmed. What I would like to do is, I'm sure you have some more questions for the panelists. I'm going to ask them to go out that door on the left, and if you want to ask them questions, they will be there for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I'd like to thank Gabe, Michael, James, and Jon for participating.